All right. I know the midterm is on Wednesday. So just a couple of reminders. Yeah, the exam is going to be 50 minutes. It's not too long, but please be here on time. Yeah, it's closed book, no calculators, blah, blah, blah. You don't need, I mean, if you have to divide 100 by 4, so that shouldn't be too hard without a calculator. There's going to be 3 parts. 1, 2, 3. And in each part there will be some indication how many points there are in respectively. There are that 200. If you get sick, you have to get sick before the exam. If you get sick after the exam, I don't know, then it gets tricky. So if you really get, okay. But anyway, you would need a medical certificate. You have to turn it in to me after you were declared to be unwell. And then the final will count for 100%. So you don't really know if you want to take the risk of having the whole grade marks from the final, then rather come here on Wednesday. Just one thing. So the third part was basically today's lecture. This was probably one of the last lectures, and the first part is multiple choice. So there's 10 questions. So here's a sample one. So you already know one of them now. And a couple of points is there's always only one correct. So if you're not sure if D or B is correct, then down cross both of them or down mark both of them, because only one of them will be correct. Having said this, to avoid you playing any sort of lottery, the spiel goes like this. If you have a correct answer, you get 3 points. If you get no answers, or if you don't fill in the answer table down there, you have no points. But if you pick the wrong answer, you have -1 point. Okay? So you have now 48 hours to figure out what is your best strategy to play. Usually people come out with a strictly positive number of points. But I remember once I had an exam like this, not in this country, somebody came out with -10 points. Bad luck. Okay, and then they're going to be on, so of course I didn't give you, I mean there's more than this one question. There's going to be some answer table probably on the last page. I didn't print it out yet, and then you would have to fill in something. So in this case, you probably just like this, so you have like +3 points, something like that. And then you also have to fill out this. So you have to hand back the, well, I'll tell you, this piece of paper. Really make sure that you hand this back in after the exam, because well, I cannot give you a negative points there, but then you definitely have 0 points if you don't hand this part in of your exam. All right. Anything else? Questions?
Is it redeemable in the final exam? So say you get a higher grade in the final exam?
No, it's this counts 40% or 30%, something like this. It's on the course plan. I don't know. I would have to like in between 20 and 50%. But I cannot change the rules. Okay. But if you're sick on Wednesday, then it's the final is 100%. All right. Questions? Cool. Okay. So let's go through the third part of the midterm. So quickly, what did we have last week? We had these 2 curves. that they were describing the two equilibria, or the combination of interest rates and outputs that produce an equilibrium on A, the goods market, it was the IS curve, and on the money market, this was the LM curve. And they made up these two curves by these two equations. But the first one was describing the equilibrium on the goods market, the second one on the money market. Okay, so then we played around with all this stuff, and I think we ended somewhere here. All right, so we had two curves. One we called the LM curve, and one the IS curve. So on the IS curve, we have an equilibrium on the goods market, and on the LM curve, we have an equilibrium in the financial market. So keep in mind, we have real income here on the horizontal axis, and the normal interest rate on the vertical axis. And so on every point here, the goods market is cleared. On every point on this curve, the money market is cleared. So there's only one point where both markets are cleared at the same time. Okay, and this is this dot here in the graph. So that's the only point here where both markets clear, okay, where supply equals demand. Okay, and so we needed two equilibrium conditions because we have to determine two endogenous variables, which was the interest rate and output. So we have basically two equations and two unknowns, and graphically that pins down one situation in this economy, meaning one interest rate and one level of output. Okay? So keep in mind that there are some exogenous variables. So exogenous in respect for the LM curve, it's M, and if you will, the level of prices. Though we keep those two price level constant, at least for the time being. And the exogenous variables that kind of determine the IS curve will be government spending, taxes. Yeah, that's what it is. Okay, so these are also exogenous, so I put a bar over it. So if we have changes in the exogenous variables, they're going to shift these curves. As you've seen already a week ago, what happens if there's, say, a shift in government spending or in taxes? That's going to shift the IS curve. Okay? And we've seen last Wednesday, if we increase or decrease money, that's going to have an effect on the LM curve, shifting to the left or to the right. Okay? So expansionary monetary policies would be where money supply increases for whatever reason, say through an open market operation. And if it's expansionary, so money goes up, it's going to have the effect that the LM curve shifts to the right. If you have an expansionary fiscal policy, say we have an increase in government spending, the IS curve would shift to the right as well. Okay, so then if you have expansionary policies, each of these curves, depending on what we do, or one of these curves would shift. There we could potentially also think about a policy mix where, say, the government works together with the central bank and they shift both curves at the same time. Okay, so basically this is what I will mainly discuss today, certain policies. Okay. But before I do this, I just quickly want to tell you a little bit about, kind of what's if you're not exactly on this curve. And let's do it at least for the money market. So we have output here. You should not look in your. That's not in your notes that you printed out. Oops. What's going on here? Hey, you gotta yell if like so screwed up. Here. So let's look at the money market. We have the interest rate here, money demand, and real money supply. Okay, so we had one equilibrium point here in the money market, and let's suppose that this level of output corresponds to this one, so that would be our LM curve. So of course you could think about what happens if you're not on the LM curve. What happens to the money market? It's pretty clear by just, or it should become really clear if you just kind of look around what happens there. So what happens, for example, if we are somewhere here at this point? Okay, is there still a situation where the money market has an excess supply or an excess demand for money? Okay, likewise, we could look to the left of the LM curve. What's happening there? Okay, so to make things simple, because it will become complicated if we change two things at a time, I just picked this curve, this point here, but what I tell you about would also hold true for this point, or this point, or for this point, so that would hold for every point that's to the right of this LM curve. Okay? But as I said, I want to make things simple, so I place this dot here, or this cross there, where I have the same interest rate as on the left-hand side of this panel, where I have the money market. Okay? So what is at this point? Well, at this point, the interest rate is the same as here, and that would be the market clearing interest rate at this level of output. However, now we have a higher level of output. And what would this have an effect on, or what would the effect of this on the money market? Well, money supply is not affected, because money supply, real money supply, was simply M over P, and these are two exogenous variables. So if output changes, these don't change. Okay? So it can only have an effect on money demand. What happens if output is at this level instead of this one to money demand? Well, we know that people will try to hold more money. So the demand for money will go up because there's more transactions, and it will be something like this. Okay? Which means that this point here corresponds to this point there. Okay? Let's suppose that's the shift of the money demand, consistent with this higher level, this randomly picked higher level of output on the right part of this figure. Again, we had the same level of interest as before. But what do we have on the money market? Well, money supply is where it was before, but money demand was this high. Okay, so there's an excess demand. Okay, and the excess demand is exactly this way. Okay, so this cannot be in equilibrium because demand is higher than supply. So usually, if the demand is higher than supply, what's going to happen? Price goes up. In this case, it's the interest rate, so the interest rate will be high. Okay, but we don't go there. We don't go to this equilibrium. We just want to look at this cross. Okay, we want to see what's happening there. So here we have an excess demand. So accordingly, everywhere here we have an excess demand for money. Okay, and in preparation for your midterm, you could think about what happens if we are here. Wow, should be pretty straightforward. That we know it's probably not an excess demand. We know the money market is not cleared because you're not on the LM curve. So what's going to happen? Well, let's make this a circle. Make this a circle here. So we have a lower level of output. That will be the money demand function corresponding to this level of output would lay here. Okay, so if you compare this point, or try to characterize this point here. At this point, we have a higher supply than demand. Okay, so what's going to happen is the interest rate would have to go down to make this an equilibrium. So this point would then, of course, correspond to this point. Right? Anyway, here to this side, we have an excess supply. So we have an excess supply of money. Okay? So of course these are situations that probably hold for a couple of seconds, but usually financial markets are clear very quickly. In a matter of minutes, we would be at a cleared price here, at least on financial markets. It's probably going to be a little bit different on goods markets. But anyway, we don't talk about points that are not in disequilibrium points. We only talk about equilibrium points because that's much better for our understanding what's going on. Okay, so we can look at these areas accordingly. And if we have an IS curve, okay, if we have an IS curve, we have similar things. So IS curve. Here, maybe I just describe it a little bit differently. So here we have the IS curve. And let's suppose we're at this point, or this cross. So we are above the IS curve. What happens if we are above the IS curve? Well, let's go down here. So the IS curve tells us the equilibrium on the goods market. And for this interest rate, and this level of output, here the goods market is cleared, meaning production equals the demand in this economy, or income. Income identity is fulfilled. So what happens if we move up to this point that has this cross there? Well, if we are up here, the interest rate is higher than here. That's the only thing that differentiates this point with this point. Okay, the level of output is the same, just the interest rate is higher. If the interest rate is higher, going to have an effect on investment. If the interest rate goes up, investment demand goes down. Everything else is constant. Recall we have some exogenous variables, taxes and government spending, they are constant. And we have the level of output that still determines the IS curve, but the level of output is not changed. Okay, we just move straight up vertically from this point that's indicated by the circle to the point that's indicated by the cross. So that doesn't change, so the only thing changes is the interest rate. Interest rate goes up, investment demand must go down. Everything else is the same, we have the same level of output. What happens? Demand goes down. Okay? So every point here, we have an excess supply of goods. Okay? So you can do this for every point on the IS curve. And likewise, if we are below this, over here, you have an excess demand. Okay, just look at this point here. The interest rate is lower than it was when the goods market was cleared. So output stays constant, all the exogenous variables are constant, interest rate goes down, what happens? There's again only an effect on the interest rate. Interest rate goes down, investment demand goes up. So if you compare the lower cross with the circle situation, it means that demand will be higher. Okay. All right. So let's talk about again this IZM model. So I told you we can change some of these variables and we can see what happens to this economy. Okay? So what happens, for example, if, or what's the prediction of this model when say the Reserve Bank is trying to be expansionary, trying to increase money supply in the economy. Okay? So what would they do? If they just increase the supply of money in the economy, so they would say buy bonds and just pump more money into the system. What happens then? Well, we know if there's an expansionary monetary policy, it's going to affect one of these two curves. So I already indicated here. So, you know, unless you already know it, keep this in mind. Okay. So if I ask in the midterm, what happens if we increase money supply and you shift the IS curve, then you will most likely not get the full point of that. Okay. Fine sets of points. Sorry. Okay. So so M and P shifting the LM curve, G and T shifting the IS curve. All right, so let's draw our little ISLM model. So we have our LM curve and the S curve, and this was an equilibrium. So again, so in the midterm, if I ask you what's going to happen if we say increase money supply, you start out at this equilibrium, okay? So the question is not what happens to it when the economy is down here. Okay, so initially we always start out here. Okay, because if there's no shocks, no changes to the economy, that's where the economy is going to settle in. Okay? So that's the initial point, and that's where the economy is in the initial situation. So what happens if the central bank increases money supply? Okay, so this is an expansionary monetary policy. Okay, what happens? So again, it doesn't do anything to the IS curve. The IS curve remains where it is. It's going to have an effect on the LN curve, and we've already seen last Wednesday what it's doing to the LM curve. It's going to shift the LM curve to the right. Okay. Seen it already when we looked at the money market equilibrium. What happens if we increase exogenous money supply? We're going to have a shift of the LM curve to the right. So what happens to this economy? Well, we have an initial equilibrium. Okay, and we have here the new equilibrium. Why is this equilibrium? Well, that's the new situation where both markets clear. Okay, so what happens? The economy moves down along the IS curve to this point. Okay, so what's going on? Well, there's two things that happen. Output goes up, and the interest rate goes down. That's in the case of an expansionary monetary policy. We would do the opposite. If we would try to do some contraction, then we would move to the left. Okay? So why is this? Why does output go up? Okay, so what happens? The LM curve shifts to the right because, at least initially, there's an excess supply of money in this economy. So what's going to happen? The interest rate will fall. So there will be some effect of this on the demand side, in particular on investment. Okay, so what's going to happen is investment will go up because the central bank is lowering the interest rate. Okay, so that's what usually central banks have in mind if they're trying to kind of move economies out of recession, say. If they are printing more money, they will try to improve or make better the conditions for people that want to take a loan, particularly say firms. So they will decrease the interest rate, and this is going to have an effect on investment. Okay. So that is the effect here of an expansionary monetary policy. Okay, so of course this feeds back then again, and we have some multiplier effect. And we move to this new equilibrium. Okay, so that's the end point. That's the question, Richard. That's it. Stop there. Don't go anywhere. Okay. So that's the new equilibrium. Let's do some fiscal policy. Output, interest rate. We have our IS curve and the LM curve, and we have this initial equilibrium. And let's suppose the government decides to increase their spending. So what do we have? We have an expansionary fiscal policy. So in this case, there's no effect on, no initial effect on the money market. So the M curve is not shifting. So the only thing that changes is G. G is an exogenous variable, and that only occurs in the IS curve equation. Okay. You've already seen a week ago what happens if we increase G. It's going to shift the IS curve to the right. And we call it IS prime. Okay. So what happened? What's happening here? Well, we have an increase in output, but also an increase in the interest rate. Okay, so if there's some sort of fiscal stimulus going on in the economy, it would shift the IS curve to the right, and the new equilibrium is one where the interest rate is higher, but the output level is higher. So why does the interest rate increase in this case? And what is different here than when we looked at the same policy if we looked at this Keynesian cross thing? But we constructed the effect of government spending in the Keynesian cross, we have the interest rate constant. What's happening here is the interest rate is affected by this policy. And why is this the case? Well, when we assume that there's only fiscal policy as the only shock to this economy, what's going on there? Well, the money supply is constant. Okay, so money supply But what happens if the S curve shifts to the right? Well, output will be higher for a given level of interest. Okay? But the demand will be higher in this economy. But if the demand or output will be higher, it's going to have an effect on money demand. Okay, money demand was given by some function of I and y, will go up because output is higher. So if output is higher and money demand goes up, money supply is where it was before, what is the initial effect? Well, the money market will no longer be in equilibrium. Demand will be higher than supply. Okay, so if the central bank does not accommodate this expansionary fiscal policy, the money market will be in disequilibrium initially. So what's happening? Well, what's happening on the money market? Right, so money supply would stay where it is, and money demand goes up. Okay, money demand. goes up. So what happens? The interest rate will go up in the money market. Okay? Here, I mean, there's the same supply of money, but there's a higher demand for it, so the price will go up. Okay, so that's happening, and that's why we are moving along this LM curve. But there's something else going on now. Because of the higher interest rate, even though we have a higher level of output, some of the private demand will be affected by it in a negative way, and that is investment again. Okay, so if we have a higher level of interest, okay, so the interest rate will go up, it would have a depressing effect on investment demand in this economy. Okay? So if the public demand for goods, government spending goes up, it's going to crowd out some of the investment of the private demand. Okay? So there will be some crowding out. Private demand, so there will be investment by public demand. Which would be government spending. Okay. So that's when we move up, there's this effect. So we have a higher G, higher demand for goods from the government, but it's going to have an effect on the interest rate and then on investment demand on private demand. It's an empirical question if the crowding out is 100% or less. So sometimes people mostly associated on the right-hand side of the political spectrum would say, yeah, actually that's why we do not want to increase public spending, because it's simply going to crowd out private spending. And that would basically be their point. Okay.
The overall output will still go up.
Sorry?
The overall output.
Yeah. What I had here. Okay, so output goes up. But of course it depends on the slope of the of the LM curve. Okay, and that's what I discussed. We're almost next. Let's come back to this. But let's suppose the LM curve would be very, very steep. Right. If the LM curve would be very, very steep, then you would have more and more of a point. Okay, so if the LM curve is very, very steep, the interest rate would increase by a lot, and accordingly crowd out a lot of private demand. Okay, so in the extreme case, where the LM curve would be vertical, what would happen? So if the LM curve would be vertical, so the LM curve would look like this, what would happen? The economy would move up to this point. And what would happen with regards to the crowding out? Well, there would be a complete crowding out. Government spending goes up by $100, investment goes down by $100. Output does not change. Okay. So in the extreme case, where the LM curve is vertical, there we would have a complete crowding out. Okay, so the change in government spending would be exactly the change in investment spending. So the only thing that would change, if the government buys some stuff, it would increase the interest rate. Okay. So in some sense, the discussion between, say, labor and deliberatives could basically pin it down to how does the LM curve look like. Okay? So if you could show that the LM curve is vertical, then you should not do any fiscal policy, at least in a monetary sense, and a macro sense. Okay. All right. A few more points. Let's suppose, what does the government do? I give you some things to think about. Well, of course, when we increased government spending in the last picture, we didn't really have anything like a budget constraint for the government in mind. Right? So what they've done, they would just like buy more goods, but they would be in a deficit. So let's suppose they're not allowed to do this, or they are smart enough not to be like Greece. Let's suppose they change government spending, but at the same amount they also change their taxes. Okay? So that would not affect the position of the government. Okay? So their budget, say, remains balanced. Right? So there's a change, and I indicate this by this delta of government spending, and it's equal to the spending to the tax change here. Okay, so the government buys hospitals for $400, but increases taxes by $400. So the government budget is not affected. What happens then? Well, again, there's no effect on the money market, or no effect on the LM curve, I should say. So the interest rate output. So we have LM curve, IS curve, but it's going to be an effect on the IS curve. So the S curve again was given as something like this. So now we increase taxes and we increase government spending. So we know in what direction the IS curve changes, because there's two effects going on now. And we looked at increase in taxes last week, and increase in taxes, they will shift the IS curve to the left. Increase in government spending will shift the IS curve to the right. What's the net effect? Who's against zero? Good. Positive or negative? Where does it shift to the right?
Positive, because there's the tax effect of consumption.
And that's less than 1.
Less than the increase in government spending.
Exactly. Okay. So here you have to think about the marginal propensity to consume, and that was, as we've seen for Australia, about 0.6 or something. Okay. So if the taxes go up by $100, the effect will be only on $60, say, on the inverse of $60 in consumption. Okay. So the marginal propensity to consume is less than 1. So this effect will dominate. So the net effect will be a shift of the IS curve. But of course, the shift will be smaller than the one where we would not change the taxes. Okay, if we don't change the taxes, we would be out here. So of course, if we obey our budget constraints here as the government, that would be the case. Okay, so the shift would be smaller. So sometimes we call this the balanced budget multiplier, because it keeps the budget of the government balanced. And the balanced budget multiplier is smaller than the one when we would not have to think about to finance our spending. But otherwise, it's still an expansionary effect. Okay, the economy moves up along the LM curve to this point. So the level of output goes up as well. So let's look at the extreme cases. for a second. Let's start out something that economists call a liquidity trap. And that's something that a lot of economists trying to characterize the Japanese economy since about, well, now it's almost 2 decades. And in some sense also a lot of economies during the global financial crisis. So what's going on here? So liquidity traps are associated with a situation where the interest rate is very, very low. In fact, it's so low that nobody anticipates that the interest rate can go any further. Okay, is this a realistic scenario? Well, usually people thought that's just like some weird idea Keynes had in the 1930s and we will never get there. But Japan has been there since 1991. And even in the United States, the federal funds rate is between 0 and 25 basis points. Okay, so it's essentially 0. Okay, so the nominal interest rate cannot go down any further. Okay, so we cannot have negative interest rates. Okay, so there's no way that the economy will go to a situation where the interest rate is even lower, where the nominal interest rates are even lower. So what happens in this situation? Well, what happens if, for whatever reason, there's more money in circulation? What happens to this money? Well, it's going to have an effect on the asset allocation of people. Because still, you could either put this money, carry around with you, or you buy bonds. But if you are in a liquidity trap, the interest rate is already at the very, very lowest level. So the only direction interest rate can go is up. So in this situation, would it make sense for you to buy bonds? Actually not, because the bonds that you would buy today, they can only lose in value. Because in the future, the interest rate goes up. Okay, so they can only lose in value. So what we do, every money that's in circulation, and if you look sometimes at Anglo-American textbooks, there's always a description that it's basically like Santa Claus who throws the money through a chimney. Or Milton Friedman had this idea that monetary policy is conducted by the central bank flying with a helicopter over a country and just spraying money. So what happens to this money that's all of a sudden in circulation? Well, everybody will just hold it in cash. It will not buy bonds because it would make a sure loss. Okay, so how can we draw the situation? How can we draw the situation here? And in fact, it's equivalent in a situation where money demand is only a function of the interest rate and not on the level of output. So what happens in this case? Let's draw first our money demand function and money supply function. So the money demand function would look the same way as it looked before, and the supply of money would be unchanged as well. Okay. So we have here output and the interest rate. So here I want to construct the LM curve associated with this liquidity trap case, where the interest rate is the only thing that determines money demand. Well, what happens? So we have this equilibrium here, and let's suppose that was associated with this one. So what happens if now all of a sudden, say, output goes up, or if we are somewhere to the right of this dot on the right-hand side of this graph? What happens if we're out there? Well, output would be higher if we are somewhere here. Output would be higher, but would this have an effect on the interest rate? Would this have an effect on money demand? No. So It would be at a higher level of output, but money demand would be where it is before. Here, because output has no effect on the interest rate. So in the extreme point, if we're even at this level of output, the interest rate remains constant. Okay, so for very low levels of output, of the interest rate, we basically have an LM curve that looks like this. Okay, so that's the liquidity trap. Of course, the LM curve at some point will shift up, and we call this the liquidity trap. And in this case, there will be no effect of monetary policy on output. Okay, so if there's some expansionary monetary policy, well, both ways, has no effect on output. Okay, so if we change M here, we just remain here. However, fiscal policy does not face the problem of crowding out. So in this case, if we are in a liquidity trap, let's draw this down here. We have expansionary fiscal policy here. We have no crowding out. Okay, so the policy description of this model for situations when the economy is at very, very low levels of interest would be to conduct an expansionary fiscal policy. So that's going to move the economy to the right out of the recession. Okay. So the other point would be, the other extreme point would be that I already described before. If money demand does not react to changes in the interest rate. Okay, so we could describe money demand simply as a function of output. How can we think about this? Well, we again have money supply. We have the interest rate here. And how can we construct, in this case, the money market equilibrium? Well, as I said, it means that money demand does not react to changes in the level of interest. How would the money supply or money demand function look like? Well, it means like that it doesn't change if the interest rate changes. So it would become very, very steep. Okay, so basically it would, in the limit, overlap exactly with this curve. Okay, so make it not the limit, make it just right before then. We have a very steep money demand function. Okay. So if we have this point initially, so if there's an increase, okay, that's money demand. If there's an increase in output, it would have an enormous effect on the money market. The interest rate would go up by a lot. So we have this, say, tiny amount of increase in money in output, and the interest rate would go up here. So in the extreme case, where this curve is vertical, we would have a LM curve that would be vertical too. Okay, so the LM curve looks like this. And that's the case I discussed previously. If we are in this situation, which is called sometimes the classical case, because classical economists did not use to assume that money demand depends on the interest rate. The LM curve would be vertical, So if we then have an expansionary fiscal policy, there would be no effect on output. Okay. Similarly, we can think about, do we have time? Yeah, we have 2 minutes. So-called investment trap. That's a situation where entrepreneurs in the economy are totally pessimistic. Okay, so let's think about this being a situation where the economy is in a depression. So they do not assume that the economy is getting out of this depression. So they don't really have an incentive to buy new machines, to invest. Because even if they would do it, they would probably produce more goods, but they couldn't sell it because the economy is in a depressed state. Likewise, even if the central bank, for whatever reason, would decrease their cost, or the entrepreneur's cost to make investment, that it would decrease the interest rate, it would not have an effect on their investment activity. That is like, are totally pessimistic. They just don't buy investment goods. So in this case, investment demand would not be a function of the interest rate. It would not react to the interest rate. So we try to draw this, and then I will be pretty much done today. How does the IS curve look in this case? So I think for the very last time, I would draw the Keynesian cross here. Output here, interest rate there. And we have this aggregate demand curve. Okay? So there was one given in this situation as this. Okay, so investment does not react to change in the interest rate. Okay, let's suppose, for whatever reason, the economy is in this point. Okay, at this interest rate and this level of output. What happens if, say, the interest rate goes up or goes down? What happens if the interest rate goes down in this situation? If the interest rate goes down, i.e. we are somewhere here, what happens to the Keynesian cross? Nothing. The interest rate doesn't show up there. Okay? It's going to have no effect on aggregate demand. So if the interest rate would be down here, the equilibrium would be the same as before. There's no shift in this curve. Which means that the IS curve is vertical in an investment trap. Which also means that monetary policy can't do anything. The economy is in a situation where everybody's totally pessimistic. And say the monetary policy prints money like wild. Okay, so they just increase money like crazy. Okay, so that's like Osama bin Laden taking over the Reserve Bank. Just that prints money like all day long. In this situation, there's no effect on output. Okay, so there's a drop in the interest rate, but an investment trap, the economy in terms of real output remains good. All right. Okay, then see you again on Wednesday.